to see you all. How's everyone doing? Are we having a good second day of ASU+GSV? Yeah? Awesome. Well, I am so excited to moderate this panel. It's been a topic that's been top of mind for us at GSV as investors in EdTech. I'm sure it's been top of mind for those of you who are innovators in the room, builders, how to think about differentiation in the space, or startup founders and such. So hopefully we'll get to touch on a ton of these topics. For those of you who are not so familiar with David versus Goliath, it really is just the story of young David, who represents maybe the startup in this case, defeating a giant warrior named Goliath, despite his smaller size and simpler weapon. And so we'll tackle things like the innovator's dilemma, how to innovate in this space at this moment. But before that, I'd love to quickly introduce all our amazing panelists. And maybe we'll just go from left to right. Narine, would love for you to share a bit more about yourself and your role in the AI space.
Sure. First of all, very excited to see you guys all here. Great conference and excited to be here. So I'm Narine Hall. I'm the co-founder and CEO at InSpace. InSpace is a video collaboration and assessment platform built for authentic connection. We provide virtual persistent spaces where students can connect and learn essential skills that through practicing, and we provide AI-powered, human-centered, persistent virtual environments.
Jim.
Hi. So, good morning. Nice to see everyone. My name is Jim Chilton. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at the Cengage Group. And I think everybody may know Cengage. It's like the one conference I get to go to where everybody knows our name, and so it's kind of cool. But we help 35 million digital users do things and learn things every year. So that's what we do. From an AI perspective, I had the pleasure of leading this incredible team the last, call it 18 months, on our initial journey to create AI solutions inside of Cengage. And yeah, excited to talk about kind of our journey and share my experiences when I was as much a David as a Goliath. So yeah.
Hi, I'm Matt. I work at NVIDIA on the Developer Program Solutions Engineering team. It is very funny for me to be here, I feel like, representing a quote-unquote Goliath. That's not how I identify, both from a height perspective, but also just I've spent most of my career working at very small companies prior to this. And furthermore, as part of developer programs, I didn't introduce NVIDIA because I assume most people here are probably familiar. That might be arrogant, but NVIDIA builds GPUs, most of the GPUs that are out there. And one of the other reasons why I don't feel like the perfect representative for giant corporate interests is because specifically on our team, developer programs, and in Inception, which is NVIDIA's startup program, we do our best to behave like an AI startup. Because we're building solutions for startups, we have to mimic the stack, the workflow, everything else. We can't just say, oh, do what we do, just throw infinite compute at it, because that's not what people can do. So I spend most of my day developing as a cloud developer at a small startup. So I'll be happy to speak from NVIDIA's perspective, but that's kind of how I feel.
Awesome. Rajen?
Hi, everyone. My name is Rajen Sheth, and I am the CEO of a company called Kyron Learning. I'm kind of the inverse of him because I previously spent about 17 years at Google and led a lot of the education products at Google, enterprise products, and at the tail end, led the AI team for Google Cloud. And so was very used to kind of the Goliath, and now am the CEO of a 25-person company. And so very much kind of in the David camp and kind of seen both as well.
That's amazing. And just, I mean, they're all underselling their backgrounds, but this group was highly curated because these are both, they've been in positions of both being Davids and Goliaths, ranging from Rajen's background, 17 years at Google, Narine, IBM Watson, Wolfram, but also founding new startups, growing them for 7 years. So I would really consider not a traditional Goliath among us, but I don't think we'll pick a winner out of David versus Goliath today, but hopefully we'll touch on the dynamics. I'd love to maybe just throw a question out there, especially since a lot of people have thought of, there's this traditional said an AI moment in late 2022. People think that ChatGPT came up and suddenly AI was a thing. But all of you have been building in AI for a very long time. So especially given that there has been this big rise in generative AI offerings, how have you all thought about prioritizing what to build in this very important moment? Maybe I'll kick off with Narine.
Sure, yeah. It's interesting. We have seen so many AI products recently, but like you said, this has been going on for a long time. Actually, about 10 years ago, when I started one of the first data science programs at Champlain College, and it was like the first undergrad program because we thought it was just too hard not to have PhD level materials. And at that time, like when we started ML for All, the whole idea was we saw that machine learning is going to be here and AI, and we saw that it's coming. There's lots of controversial issues that we need to face as a society. It's not in the engineers' domain anymore. It was getting out of that small group. And at that time, we realized we need to educate people. So it's accessible and available so they understand what it is and what it is not, so they can use it right. It's just like any other tool and can do all sorts of things. And for us as a company, so when we started about 4 years ago, I was in the middle of a pandemic and I was teaching and we moved to online and I realized we needed better tools. And that's I pretty much just built it for myself and then it just took off. And at that time we were using AI to do a lot of things like agency for students and how we were managing a lot of technology. But we couldn't talk about it because people weren't ready to hear. So like if you go to a school and you say we're using AI, they were almost scared. So almost like our salespeople would refuse to talk about what we're doing, like in the background. But now we can actually talk about it, which is really exciting. So on our end, we just listen to our customers and like their pain points, and being small and nimble means we can react more rapidly to that. And sometimes it's like really listening for the unspoken in the room, because the pain points that people think they have are sometimes not the ones that they really have. So that's how we have been developing, really not going just AI solutions, but like from day zero, it was like, what do we need in this sort of connected learning environment, and then going backwards from it.
Rajen, similarly, you're also building a new startup in this space. So how do you find that AI white space, and how did you decide to build what you ended up building?
Yeah, and I think part of it is turning it on its head. It's not like what do you build with AI, but what problem are you solving, and how do you use AI to solve that problem? One thing that was really interesting, I think, an interesting thing that's happened. So when I started with the Google AI, the Cloud AI group, you kind of had to have a PhD in AI to really do anything significant with AI. This was like 2017. Now, anyone out there can do something with AI, which is good and bad. Like, I think it's very good because it democratizes AI, but it's also hard to kind of distinguish between different things that are there. What I always found at Google, though, is that anytime we tried to go into like a vertical area, we can only do so much. And we relied on startups out there that really knew that area really well and created their entire company around it. The product, the use case, the go-to-market, all of that. And so I think that's a key thing for us, is figuring out exactly what problem we're solving, and then figuring out how do we use and stay on the cutting edge of AI to bring the right tools to bear.
Jim, and then you also, Jim and Matthew, you all come from organizations that have, are established, not necessarily startups in the last 1 or 2 years. How do you think about innovating in this AI moment? Because I know there are a lot of you who are thinking about building new AI products, introducing it into your workflows. How do you think about fostering new AI adoption within your organizations, but also how do you think about that prioritization between internal and external?
I think it's I find the education industry to be peculiar, and it seems to be an industry we're in where technology prior to the pandemic is slow to adopt. And so when I compare it to the industries that I served in before this, is that even the definition of AI is like everything is AI now. And the reality is, when I think about the early days at SolidWorks or Dassault Systems, when we were doing generative design of AI, it was create me a swing arm for a motorcycle that has 600 Newton meters of torque on the back, and it generated a swing arm for a motorcycle. That was AI. And so for me, this has been a super interesting journey to get to that. And in a session not so different than this one, we had faculty there, and there was a woman off to my right, and on her nameplate, she said, "I'm here for the original AI," which is academic integrity. And I don't know why you're talking to me about this technology. It was the most interesting conversation I've had about it because this community is really struggling with the idea of what is the role of generative AI and how does it fit. And so when we went into this, it was both who are their customers, what are we trying to do for them, and how do we make sure that what we're building is something they welcome, not something that they're terrified by. So we spent a long time trying to understand this because the easiest thing for us to do at Cengage would be like, let's take the 4 petabytes of data we have, we'll slam that together, and we'll make it available for students at $20 a pop. We could do that all day long. I could have done that the day after ChatGPT was. And it goes completely against the values that we have as a company. You know, it'd be so hypocritical for us to do that. We actually believe that we should be helping learners. And so the team spent a ton of time making sure that we were building something that actually would support critical and analytical thinking, something that would allow customers to embrace what we were doing and see it, not simply an answer key to every book that we've ever written. And so, so for us, that became it. It's like understand that customer, understand your values, and then make sure that you're building things around that that align to those two.
Yeah, I love that.
Super cool. Yeah, I'm flooded with thoughts after listening to all of these responses, so I'll just pick a couple things to jump in on. And one of these things that I've heard come up a couple times is just the sort of nomenclature change that occurred anywhere between 2 and 4 years ago, going from ML, machine learning, and to AI. And that's something that I have found personally frustrating, and not just because my initials are ML, but no, because one, to me, this is all sort of looking in the past teleologically, but when ML was kind of the thought paradigm, I think there was a little bit more of a bottom-up approach of, oh, machine learning, it's not as prescriptive in terms of what it means. It's such a dry technical idea that, the applications could be pretty open-ended. Whereas AI, I think, just has such a strong cultural connotation and a strong implication that people have a tendency to think top-down. Kind of, you were saying we should do the opposite. We should think about use cases. We should think about problems to solve and what technologies can enable that. And the beauty of where we are with AI is that there are so many things we can do to solve just about any problem I can think of. But instead, I definitely observe a lot of people are like, I want to use AI. What problem can I try to solve? And again, this is sort of my personal opinion that is maybe going to find a harder, market fit. But the only other thing I'll say in terms of being at NVIDIA, it's a really interesting place to be in terms of choosing what to work on, both because I think there are a couple benefits of our position, one of which is we have this gigantic, very flat organization in which people are working on effectively everything. Anything you can think of, there's probably somebody, some researcher somewhere working on it and thinking there's probably some domain researcher and there's some hardware person, and hopefully they're working together about how to optimize the software and hardware solutions for that. But for my team specifically, again, it's kind of our job to emulate, to work with startups and think like startups. And so we get to do this really cool back and forth where it is our job to stay on top of research and to think about any time. We've been working on RAG, which is like I'd say a pretty a buzzword right now, retrieval augmented generation. But we've had an internal RAG tool we've been using for 2 years because it was somebody's job to stay on top of that, and we were like, oh, this could be useful for this internal application, and we can then turn that into a resource for our Deep Learning Institute to teach how to do that. So that's like a really lucky confluence of sort of casting a wide enough net to make sure that whatever does pop off, we have something going for it. But we also get to go back and forth with startups in that, I'll choose an example. There's a really cool startup out there that I guess I'm going to do some buzz marketing for and shout out. Unstructured, if you are familiar, if you're a practitioner in the area, super cool. A really difficult problem in our space is taking in unstructured data for LLM applications, and we use a ton of tools, and this is a startup that comes out, brings a great tool, and we also work with them on developing their their use of NVIDIA technology for that. So the goal is to try to create these kind of positive feedback loops where we can learn from startups, provide value to them, and hopefully they can learn how to make their business even better, and we can keep using a better and better product that they create.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I feel like a common thread I'm hearing is you all are centering this work around the actual problem itself. And I do think there is a common kind of trend we're seeing where there are AI products being pushed out that are solutions in search of a problem. So really interesting. And I think it's awesome, I think, from the sidelines for all of your organizations, seeing the velocity at which you are pushing new products. How do you keep that velocity going? How do you keep your team at the forefront of all these innovations and keep them building? Yeah.
It's interesting. And just quickly going back to what Jim said, early on we were like, okay, everybody's going to build chatbots. You can throw one together in a couple hours, and then just, like you said, $20 a pop, you can sell it. And so for us as a company, so what we love to do is you bring a group of machine learning engineers and educators together. It's sort of an interesting combination. And for us, what's exciting is what are some of the challenging problems that a lot of people will have hard time solving? And we like to sort of tackle this, what we call impossible 100x problems. And that's where we strive as a team. That's just the impact of that is so much bigger. And so when we looked at this, we're like, okay, well, a lot of people are going to build chatbots, and market forces will absolutely drive towards personalized learning because it's profitable and it works. What is a really hard thing that our customers are trying to solve in education that no one is going to touch because it's really hard? Yeah. And for us, that was social learning at scale. That is a really hard problem, and we work with some of the largest online schools in the country, and I can tell you no one has solved that yet. And we're partnering with a lot of them to solve this because it's such an interesting problem, and we're using AI and machine learning algorithms that we have been developing for a very long time, and also behavioral data that we have from how students like to interact and what patterns we're seeing in this to really create that social learning at scale that's still flexible and affordable, so because we know we're working with working adults who don't have time to just be at school from set times to times, and to create that flexible synchronous environment where they can thrive while also having that human connection to other students. That is a really complex problem, and now we're finally at a point in history that we can actually solve that, because we couldn't do this when online learning was just being built. The technology just wasn't there. And today we have digitally accelerated population, people who are very comfortable getting on a call, and we also have AI that can now create that coaching experiences where students can have this human-centered experiences with each other, but they also get this AI-powered environments where they get real-time feedback and improvement in assessment. So to me, that's a really complex problem worth tackling, and that's where as a small team, that's where we thrive, right? That's what's exciting for us.
I think you let them run.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that the one thing when you think about they're technologists. I think the coolest thing for us is that when we went at this is that we joked internally about the volunteer team and at least one or two of them in the room, and we took people throughout the company that had a passion to do this. This is nights and weekends. This was in addition to their regular job, and said, how do you, so it wasn't we are telling you, go work on it. They were coming to us, here's what we think we can do. These were people that were experts in both technology and the industry and what they thought they could do and that they thought would be valuable at a time where they loved the idea of learning out of that. The single best thing they got at the end of 18 months was a sweatshirt from me that said, innovative AI, right? So I think these people want to do this work, and we ended up with a Slack channel of over 1,000 employees who had ideas and feelers on the market of hey, I heard this at this National Geographic event. I heard this at a Cengage Hire event. I heard this in a Milady cosmetology event. All of our brands hearing different things about artificial intelligence and feeding it back to us. So for me, it's empowering them. It's that simple, letting the people run, and I think absolutely is going to produce incredible results.
I really resonate with that, but I'm also, I think, one of them that is allowed to run
exactly,
in this case. Yeah. And that's just, I'll just say, personal context for this for me is this is actually a second career for me. prior to being an ML engineer, which is kind of how I still identify despite my more abstract title now. I was a professional classical musician and teacher, and just learning and practicing things is something that I really like to do. And I've discovered after moving from being in community with artists to being in community with engineers that it's kind of the same. It's just a bunch of nerds.
Just without Slack, right? Yeah.
Yeah, well, no, we were a San Francisco ensemble, so we had a Slack channel. But maybe not every classical ensemble does. But no, just, that ability to learn. And again, it's something that I'm just so inspired by because my career transition, me being on this stage, is totally enabled by edtech platforms. Shout out Fourth Brain, which is in Andrew Ng's portfolio. That was where I learned a lot about machine learning and deep learning AI and all of these places. And now I get to work on the Deep Learning Institute at NVIDIA, the DLI, and I get to take those courses and teach those courses as my job. And it's something that I was doing anyway when I was a musician, and now I am sort of free to run in that way. So to me, part of the beauty of the type of work that we're talking about right now is it's such a wide open space. It's been democratized so heavily, thanks to EdTech in large part, that actually I'm going to pivot for a second and just say it's kind of ironic that I think EdTech in some senses is underrepresented in something like NVIDIA's startup portfolio in the Inception program. So I definitely encourage folks to join up, talk to us, because I think this needs to be a strong loop. And the Deep Learning Institute is so inspired by the EdTech platforms that we all learned on that now we're recreating just with much more specialized and sort of gigantic compute resources. So I definitely want to see more engagement between us and a community that, again, is the reason why I'm here in the first place.
So I think I would say the pace here is exhilarating. One, I've never seen over 25 years in technology things advance so quickly as they have in the last 18 months. So an example is I did a session yesterday on generative AI, and I'd done that same session about 3.5 months ago, and I looked at my slides and they were completely out of date. Since that time, Gemini launched, actually 2 versions of Gemini launched. You had a variety of other things that have all come out at that same time. And it's amazing to see that every week something is happening. For me, it's been really exhilarating in 2 senses. One is that, because as that's all happening, it just is more fuel for us to be able to do interesting things. Like in our case, we need to stay on the cutting edge to be able to kind of build the solutions that we're building, especially because we're building video-based AI and multimodal-based AI solutions that extend educators and can feel like you're actually interacting with an educator. And so we're relying on some of the newest technologies that are out there. The second thing is it's fun being part of a 25-person startup because we can just do things like that. And we can just pivot and do things like that. One story, 6 months ago, we were finding that a lot of our students loved our solution, but then when we're starting to talk to companies about using it, the number one feedback is, this is great, but it's incredibly hard to build. And so I casually threw out a challenge to our team about, can we build something where in 5 minutes you can create this video-based interaction? And they did it. And and it was a combination of the technology and the team to be able to do this. I don't think it's limited. I think to Jim's point, it's not limited to small companies though. So when I was at Google, I was always on the fringe part of Google, like the startups within Google, and that was always a fun thing. It was tough to do, but it's always a fun thing because you can utilize kind of the resources of a large company, but then start to move it into a new direction. I think there are models there that work.
Yeah. Very interesting. And so I guess getting to the heart of it, we've touched a lot on advantages that startups have, incumbents have. It feels like startups are constantly in this moment, especially this AI moment, trying to find better data, more distribution, and that's something that incumbents have in this space and established players have in this space. At the same time, obviously, incumbents deal with innovators' dilemma. You have a lot of organizational friction to deal with. What do you all see as kind of the advantages for each, and how do you overcome a lot of these, disadvantages for both sides?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah.
Or you go ahead.
No, I'll go ahead. You can go. Ladies first. Yeah, there you go.
All right, sure. It's interesting. Both have their massive advantages and disadvantages, right? So I'll share a story. When I was at IBM Watson, for example, fresh out of grad school, I just got my PhD, super excited. I joined IBM Watson, fantastic experience. And one of my first projects happened to be this project where I was going to look at a lot of data and then try to predict with certain accuracy, can we basically replace the job of the underwriters in insurance? And it just happened, initially we were getting bad accuracy, and then with some modifications and stuff, we got 99% accuracy. So that was really interesting. So then, somehow I got an email from Ginny Rometty, who was the CEO of IBM at that time, and I got to meet her. And she said something that really stuck with me. And she said, at IBM, we decide where we want to go, and we look that direction, and the market goes that direction. And this was at the time. At the time, I was paused for a minute. I was like, oh, that's an interesting statement. But what was interesting that at that time, IBM Watson just started the Jeopardy and all of that. It was very much at the beginnings of this. And now, on the retrospective, I think she had a really good point about the volume of where these large companies go and how that can change. But for me, it was also interesting that at that time, I was like, okay, well, I wrote the patent and all that stuff. And then I realized what I've created is not going to see the market in probably in the next 10 years or so. So I quickly got out of that and I joined startup ecosystem. And then on the sort of having that massive market advantage is great because you have all these channel distributions. Once you hit this really good nuggets, you can really quickly, spread that and distribute it. On the other side of this, the startup world, we move so much faster. Everything we can think about just hits the market very quickly. We get instant feedback. We get to iterate a lot, which is a huge advantage. But the distribution channels, that's kind of where it gets. So I think sometimes the collaboration is the best way. So for example, with InSpace, we work with a lot of learning management systems that are already out there. People are using them, so we partner with them. So we're exactly where our students are. So it's easy, one click, and they're in there enjoying this sort of innovative solutions right exactly where they were without massive change management.
Yeah, I think in startup companies, at least in my experience, this is an opportunity. When you think about other technology advantages that have happened, it becomes a leveling factor. So you think about the evolution of microprocessing as an example, not to go too far back, but when we helped start a company called SolidWorks, is that this was the pivot point where you could actually create a competitive 3D model using Intel processors. And all of a sudden, it changed the entire framework. This is that moment again in my mind, where this allows it to be a releveling, where small companies can take this moment and do something that large companies don't have an enormous advantage to. I think if you're a large company, I think the part that you've got to spend more time doing is looking behind you instead of in front of you. And I've seen that work really well at some companies where you are less focused on your obvious competitors and more about the people who could actually change completely the business model around you and really eat your lunch. And I think that's something that this technology has the opportunity to do. So I'm inspired by the startup companies and what I think they could do with it. And the same thing, bless you, is I think that you would have the opportunity with these large companies to be bright enough and vulnerable enough to go, somebody's got a better idea than we do. Somebody had a better idea, and we should go figure out what the hell that idea is before they do. And so for me, I think that both companies have an enormous opportunity, but I think this is that moment where everything's level. Everybody's got a moment now to go play in the same sandbox at the same moment of time. And I think we've seen how that's turned out in other companies, so other technologies. So yeah.
Yeah, I like that way of thinking about it. I mean, I'll say, I think there are some really obvious advantages to being at a Goliath type organization like NVIDIA, like again the aforementioned infinite compute, which is truly something of how we think about it, which is just the closest I've been to chastised, and it was good-natured, but it was if something's not working, have you tried throwing everything at it? And truly, the scale of everything is, so many orders of magnitude greater than what I'm accustomed to develop, sort of thinking of myself as a startup cloud ML developer. But there's another factor to that, which is, and I think the best proof of it is that NVIDIA calls itself the biggest startup in the world. And I'm sure there have been many large companies that call themselves that. I don't think that's unique as a thought, because pretty much all of these companies started as startups. But I do think that there's something very real to that in terms of the agility, the ability to pivot, the ability to sort of go after what is such clearly a better idea and not have the overhead of having, whatever amount of sunk cost or whatever it is for a large organization. So I think the fact that large organizations are trying to be flat and trying to be nimble like a startup kind of shows off that advantage that startups have. And the last thing I'll say here is also just technically in terms of where we are in the AI moment, which is that, I'm going to say something technical that if you're welcome to have nuanced disagreement with it, but I think it's like an okay generalization, which is just, we're seemingly still in the linear phase of the relationship between LLM size, compute, and results. And so that is continuing to incentivize these huge companies to make larger and larger models. That is kind of, I think, how people are trying to build their moat, which is just like, you can't build a model as good as OpenAI because you just don't have that data, you don't have that compute, whatever it is, so you have to pay us however much we charge you through our API, like per token. But I do think that I'm not going to make any predictions on timing, but the moment for small is coming, and you can see a lot of this with developers of like, okay, maybe we don't need that enterprise scale LLM for every task that we're doing. In fact, we know we don't. In fact, the number of tasks we think we need that gigantic model for is shrinking every day as we so I think startups have access to large scale compute through their cloud providers, and I think the better ideas with smaller models are going to really start showing their performance, and so that is an advantage to startups, or at least it's a leveling tool.
So the way I'd put it, when my old colleagues from Google ask me, how's it been going in a startup, I tell them that the things that were really hard at Google are really easy for me right now, and the things that were really easy at Google are incredibly hard. And so on one side, we can move at a very quick pace, like things that used to take me 6 months take me 2 weeks now to do. The other thing is that, to an extent, the short-term expectations are not as big. So, for example, like when you start a project at a large company, you're expected to hit something that's like $1 billion revenue over the course of a pretty short period of time. Whereas if you're a startup, you're kind of trying to first find product market fit, and you can kind of take things incrementally, and it allows you to be a little bit more nimble. On the other hand, I think there are two things about the scale of Google that really mattered. One is just the distribution. And so, so one is the distribution. The second is, I think, Narine, what you said, you can move the market. So an example for that for me was Chromebooks. So I was part of the Chrome OS team, and we started Chromebooks for education. People thought we were just bonkers nuts to create a desktop operating system in 2011. And two things made it succeed. One is we had Google Apps for Education that was used by millions and millions of students, so Gmail, Google Docs, et cetera. And as a result of that, we had distribution. The second thing was we were big enough that we can shape the market. We could take a crazy bet like that and actually help shape the market. And as a startup, you can't do that. And so that is it's something that it is definitely an advantage of a larger company. I think last thing I'll say, I think Jim, you put it well. I think it used to be that if you're doing anything in AI, you have to have a ton of data to actually really do anything. Now you don't. And so it, I think, levels the playing field in an interesting way.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say, just to add to Rajen's point, there is also one really strong advantage that startups have. We sort of don't have all that legacy luggage of both infrastructure and mindset and tech that we have to inherit and figure out how to wrap our hands around it. And that's where a lot of really good energy and resources go. I think sort of as a startup, we can just completely rethink online education at scale and just go for it, right? So like, and then figure out how to bring our customers along and all of that stuff, right? Like that has to happen too. But like just kind of being able to just completely say, let's forget about everything that's been done so far. Like we don't have to inherit that and start from scratch. Like with the technology that's available today, how would we build this amazing online learning experience for everybody that's connecting and it has that human connection and everything? And yeah, and we don't have to compromise.
We definitely have a lot of AI startups in the room, and so I think as all of you have interfaced with, the benefits and disadvantages of building with AI, I think the big thing that has been mentioned is just the cost of compute right now. How much it takes to build your own model. So I guess any thoughts on build versus buy in this moment? Is it worth spending time on fine-tuning models for specific tasks when you know that GPT-5 is going to come out and do it way better than you? What's kind of the allocation of time and resources right now?
Unit economics. I feel like for startup companies, understand your costs. I think about probably 100 startups that I've talked to in the past year that have come to Cengage with, we have an idea, we have a product. And when you get into the unit economics, they don't even understand what it is yet. They don't know what the token cost will be. So how can you possibly sell something that you don't have a cost basis for? So my caution to the startups would be like, understand what you're getting yourself into, because big companies will hold you accountable to those promises. And that one engagement where you think you won this big whale of an account could actually be the very whale that crushes you. So I'd be very cautious about that. But I do think there's a key point, which is from an engineering perspective, certainly the way we've thought about it is that the generative AI models exponentially outpower what we need. As a matter of fact, we've seen more accuracy by providing less data. In many of our cases, when we think about the assistants, we're grounding it down to a single ISBN. It's remarkably intelligent and doesn't have nearly the overhead by providing it easily 150,000 ISBNs, which we could do. But I think understanding that if you're going to be in a startup in this space, you really want to understand how much is this thing going to cost you, how is it going to operate, and how can you have some certainty around that and be really thoughtful about your model. For those people who are old enough in the room, this will be back to CPU licensing. When you get to CPU-based licensing, call it 10, 20 years ago, it crippled companies because they hadn't thought, they really had the mindset of NVIDIA of like, we have endless compute. We can do this until the licensing models changed to CPU and every badly written application fell apart and your costs went through the roof. So my encouragement to those who are startup companies is understand your unit economics. Yeah.
About that. And I know time is flying by. I feel like I have a million other questions, but hopefully for any of you in the audience, please do flag them down. These are some of the most amazing innovators in the education space right now. I guess to end with just a nugget of insight, as you all think about this AI space and having been in it for so long, from that 30,000-foot view, what advice do you have for people who are trying to innovate with AI? And do you have a little, any insight into what's coming to space and what are you most excited for? Quick 30 seconds.
Just quickly, I would say stay focused on human side of things. AI has always been there, it'll always be there, it'll solve really cool problems for us, and we'll always innovate in that space. But we have to stay focused on humans and what we're really good at, and then as we all get AI coworkers and we all become like managing little teams of AI agents, focus on those high-level human skills, right? Like executive thinking, connecting the dots, and teamwork in the AI accelerated workspace.
I would say whether you're David or Goliath, empower your team. Let them run. Do not hold them back. There's an enormous opportunity here that you really want to embrace and allow people to participate in the creation of that. I think one technology that I'm super excited about is some people are familiar with Glean. Before Glean, there was a product called Atolio. I'm super excited about what they're doing because this convergence of search and AI coming together across the enterprise really is an interesting paradigm when I think about how you structure and how does enterprise work. Yeah, there's going to be some breakthroughs.
Yeah, this is already great advice that I would probably share. So I'll just try to add to it and say, prototype with large, expensive models. See what can be done. Think of problems. See if you can solve them. and then see if you can solve them with something much smaller and simpler.
Yeah.
And then work back up
Love that.
and just try to stay. If you need a big model, okay, but you probably don't.
So I think three things we'll quickly see. I think AI is going to get more accurate. I think it's going to get less expensive. And I think multimodality is going to become a big thing over the next year. The two pieces of advice I would have is, one, solve a problem. And I think that's a key thing to think about. The second is all of the AI solutions I've worked on across multiple industries, the ones that succeeded are one where there's a human in the loop. And so the teacher, I think, is the key thing here. So empowering the educator, I think, is a key part.
Awesome. And with that, we've run out of time, and thank you so much for tuning in.